Wow, what an epic finale this was. Yo, what's good, Bojo Reviews, and heavy spoilers for Mob Psycho 100 Season 3, Episode 12, the conclusion to the anime you've been warned. This entire episode was just everything that I really loved about the series. This final arc with Mob just sort of going psycho was probably some of the best stuff I've seen in the entire anime, but let's go from the top. The episode starts off with Tsubomi looking up into the sky, thinking whether or not she should stay or wait for Mob, and she decides to stay, and I really like how she, despite the weather being dangerous, still went out of her way to stay just to hear what Mob had to say, even though it didn't end up well for Mob. Mob talks to his inner self and debates whether or not Tsubomi will accept his inner self or not. Mob stopped using his powers on the day Tsubomi lost interest in them, and that was all for the fact that he needed to change in order for her to fall in love with him. But Mob's inner self doesn't really agree with that statement, saying that she was probably the first person to acknowledge Mob for who he was instead of looking at him like some sort of weirdo. This darker entity that's inside of Mob seems to be like another side of him, a bit like Naruto and his darker inner self. It's like Mob is talking to himself and debating whether or not he's doing the right thing or the wrong thing. I really like this entire theme of Mob's dark inner self just sort of boiling over and just sort of taking over. It sort of relates to the real world, where people in the real world, when people shut their emotions deep down inside, one day it'll just keep boiling up until it just explodes and then chaos ensues. And I think that's what the writers were trying to get across to the audience when writing this darker self of Mob. Darker Mob tells real Mob that Reigen only uses him and doesn't really care for him, and we did have an incident in the previous season where Mob was starting to feel a bit used by Reigen, so I guess that's what Darker Mob is sort of referring to. But I really love Reigen's tenacity and him just not giving up on Mob. Reigen is battered and bruised, being tossed around like a ragdoll, but he doesn't quit. He does everything he can to just run after Mob, despite him lacking the powers to stop him, and we play the original theme song from Season 1, which did bring back a lot of emotions from that time. The animation gets kinda crazy with Reigen just hopping and jumping and sliding, and Reigen is finally able to come toe to toe with him thanks to the power of Dimple, and yeah, Dimple is alive. I feel like with this series they just cannot kill any of the main characters. I was a little disappointed by it because it would have been more emotional and impactful if Dimple had truly died back in episode 6. You'd think with a world of all these psychic dudes and dudettes with all these crazy powers that there'd be some sort of casualty, any major deaths, but we don't get that throughout the series, which did bum me out. But nevertheless, Reigen finally admits to Mob that he has no psychic powers, and this is pretty much the trigger that stops Mob from going crazy. This is the first time we've seen Reigen ever break down in front of Mob or anyone. I feel like Reigen's lack of power made him feel very insecure about himself, and he felt like when he saw other people he could try and use them to benefit his own agendas, being a liar and a scam, and telling him that this is who he truly is inside was probably the best character development of Reigen in the entire series so far. Reigen's little speech on how everyone has a different side to them almost felt like breaking the fourth wall. It was almost like he was talking to the audience. Reigen tells Mob that he should accept who he truly is, the darker inner self, and I really like how this all sort of wrapped up and ended. Instead of Mob and the gang trying to destroy Mob's inner darker self, Mob begins to acknowledge it, but Mob does get rejected by Tsubomi, and yeah, he isn't really okay with it. He breaks down crying as one would. I feel like this was probably one of the few times Mob has ever truly been truthful about his emotions and not hiding them deep down inside, which is a step in the right direction. We then get an epilogue of Mob and the fitness team just pretty much doing their thing. It looks like Mob is also not using his psychic powers anymore, as he tries to rescue a cat by climbing a pole and trying to grab it. Hanazawa has a new hairstyle. The episode ends with pretty much Mob and his friends throwing a surprise birthday party for Reigen. It's sort of a callback to when Reigen had a birthday in season 2 and he had no friends to celebrate it with, and he finally, after all this time, is able to have a party with people, which was a great moment for this character. And that's pretty much the end of Mob Psycho 100. Overall, it's been a pretty fun ride. I've been watching this show for a week now for the first time, and it's pretty good. I feel like I like more of the individual episodes than a season overall, so I can't really rank which season is the best, as I feel like each episode had its own sort of mini story. But I'll give this episode a 10 out of 10 and an A star, but in terms of the entire series, I'll probably give it an 8 out of 10 and I'll give it a B+. So what is the moral of the Mob Psycho 100 story? Well, I suppose it is to not shut away your emotions and to not be afraid to ask for help, I think, but I could be wrong. Tell me in the comments down below what you guys thought. What do you think of Mob Psycho 100 overall? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Like for more anime reactions, reviews, comparisons, breakdowns, rankings and more. Board review, signing out.